Hi, Kevin. Thank you for joining me on the podcast. How are you doing?
I'm well, thanks, Ethan. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for taking the time out to come on the podcast. It's great to have you on, and I just want to start by talking about the 25th anniversary reissue of your book, Awaydays. How did that come about?
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, it's sort of frightening that it is, literally a quarter of a century. It seems like no time at all, since the original has been published. Um, the brief history of Away Days is that I first wrote it when I was not long out of school, and that was all I'd ever wanted to do was to be a writer. And I dashed it out, and in one sense, that was its purest form because it literally, it came out in a rush, and it probably read that way. And I think, there's a lot of that first version that was exciting and visceral and raw, it was really raw. I sent it off to Penguin, and they, looking back, it was good of them. They took the time to actually write a letter back in an era before word processors, so every letter was typed, and it was essentially saying, there's something there, don't give up, but it's nowhere near ready to be published. So that was that. I put it to one side, and really the epiphany, like the breakthrough, was the publication of Trainspotting in 1993, I think. And because up until that point, I'd really come to the conclusion that sort of kind of gritty, urban, working class fiction of the sort that I love to read was probably not going to have a market. And then Trainspotting came out, and then the Football Factory, John King, and there was, there was various other books that all seemed to come out around about that time, and I just thought, oh, do you know what? I'm gonna get this out again. I'm gonna have another go at this, and this time, I was fortunate. There was three or four publishers interested. Um, Ironically, Canongate was one of the publishers. They'd only just recently been set up by Jamie Bing in Edinburgh, and I went with Jonathan Cape 25 years ago. They were Irving Welsh's publisher, Roddy Doyle's publisher. I loved Roddy Doyle's work. Martin Amos's publisher, and it seemed it was quite flattering, to be in that sort of company. So came out with Cape, was immediately sort of hailed as a cult classic, which basically means that no one's ever going to buy it, but it's the reviews are quite good. And yeah, 25 years on, the rights came up for renewal, and this time Canongate said, okay, you said no last time, but this time we're doing it. So it's quite a lovely edition. They've got this imprint called the Canons, which is sort of their version of like a Penguin classic or a modern classic. So it's lovely to be part of that, to be in that library, and from my point of view, it sort of brings the journey to a very satisfying bookend, if you will. It's nice to have that legacy. It started off with Jonathan Cape. It's ended up as a canon. So that's a really nice place to be.
Yeah, it's kind of gone full circle, really, hasn't it?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah. If you wanted to be cheesy about it, those are the two bookends, really. The starting point with with Cape, and the sort of the prestige and everything of being part of that publishing house, and then ending up at this end of the journey, which is really, this lovely, classy canon edition that's come out. It just, it seems fitting in a number of ways, but just in terms of the journey that I've been on, from meeting Jamie Bing, as a young up and coming publisher, to him now being my publisher, it all seems quite fitting.
Yeah, definitely. What made you want to write the book in the first place about that topic?
It was having lived through those times, really. I mean, it was just, I suppose, for any teenager, you know, your teenage years are your golden years, and everything seems exciting, and everything, you know, it seems like there are endless possibilities, and you know, you're literally starting out on your own journey, you know, going traveling and seeing the world and all this sort of stuff. For me, my obsessions as a 15-year-old kid were music, football, and fashion, and living around here, you know, they all came together. And it was just very unusual. I mean, from a fashion point of view, um, when you started going to, you know, to football regularly and going to away games, you noticed that the teams from around the sort of Merseyside area seem to dress differently from other places that you go. And we get a lot of stick for that. You know, for example, I mean, it's hard to imagine me with hair now, but I used to have like a fringe going over one eye, and you know, and so did everybody who went to the football from around here. And you'd go to, you know, to places in the Midlands, the Northeast, you know, wherever, and you'd get loads of abuse, you know, for looking like a girl and all this sort of thing. Then a few years later, everybody was dressing that way. So it just seemed, you know, it seemed like, you know, um, very kind of distinctive and unusual and unique time to be growing up, where you had that collision of post-punk music. I mean, all the, you know, there was the Liverpool bands like Teardrop Explodes, Echo and the Bunnymen, Heat, and but you know, my favourite band of all time is probably Joy Division, you know, from Manchester. And then further afield, Sheffield, you had Cabaret Voltaire, Human League, you know, um, Ultravox from Huddersfield. Where are they from? I think John Fox is a Yorkshireman. Anyway, so all of this stuff, you know, electronic music, post-punk music, um, uh, heightened fashion, and then the, you know, the whole thing of I suppose it's a coming of age thing, really. You stop going to football with your dad and your uncles and your brothers, and you're making your own way. And I wanted to capture some of the excitement of that period, but also I think to try and tell a sort of, you know, a gang story in a different way. So it wasn't, you know, it wasn't necessarily that thing of, you know, we turned up and they ran away, and all this sort of thing. It was more trying to tell a much more human story about, you know, two adolescents, you know, two teenagers on the verge of adulthood. They were trying to find themselves and try and find their place in the world, and who both think they want what the other has got. And it's that, you know, that sort of ever shifting balance of power, and you know, the power of those first kind of meaningful friendships that you have as a young person as well. So all of those things went into it. That was what I was trying to do. And I think, you know, to a large extent, that, you know, it's hit the mark. You know, it seems to, it's, you know, all these years on, it seems to mean something to readers. You know.
Well, you mentioned you want what somebody else has got, like the other friends got. But I think a lot of teenage lads can like resonate with that, where like one of them wants to fit in and be part of a scene, and the other one wants to leave everything behind. And I think a lot of teenage lads can resonate with that.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, you know, from probably, you know, when you leave primary school, there's a real sort of, you know, there's a compelling kind of pressure to conform and to fit in and to be one of the gang. And I think from the perspective of Carty, you know, he's sort of the outsider looking in, and he's desperate to be part of all that. From the way he's looking at it, it seems glamorous and exciting and dangerous and all the things that his life isn't. You know, he's a junior civil servant. He's you know, he lives in the suburbs, and from Elvis's point of view, he's been in that from the start. You know, he's from one of the big estates in the area. He's well known, well liked. He's respected. He's wild, and but he's got this more introspective side to his character, where he's, you know, he's asking the big questions and wondering where he fits in the universe and all of that. And what he sees in Carty is a kindred spirit and a way out. So, I think it was always doomed, that sort of kinetic friendship where, they hit the ground running and it's wild and exciting and everything, but they want different things. And both of them in their own way grows up and comes through it and learns something from the experience and the relationship. And I'm always being asked what happened to Elvis, and the answer is I don't know for sure, because he has this self-destructive streak. I mean, both in the book and in the film, he's left on the bridge looking down at Carty on the platform, waiting for him to arrive. So in that respect, he has the last. He calls the shots. He decides when the story ends. I've always liked to think that from that point, he gets off the bridge and goes and gets on a National Express or sticks his thumb out and goes off to Berlin, which was always his big dream, was to go and live that life, be like David Bowie and go and live in East Berlin. He probably would have had a massive heroin overdose, who knows? But it's deliberately left open. People can take those characters where they want.
Was there ever any talk of a sequel?
Yes, very much so. Both in terms of the original book, and probably more so with the film. The film was such a huge success, and I got as far as, like, I did have a title for it. It was called Berlin, and I'd had the thought that we could start the story with Carty and Elvis as they would be now, so to speak, looking back on what had happened next, and there being a reason for Carty to go out to Berlin, and first of all try and locate Elvis, and then to have an understanding about what their lives have meant and what has gone on in the meantime. That is as far as it got, though. Really, it was me. I had a radical change of mind. I was thought, these things are probably just best left as they are. For all that it was a tempting offer, it was quite a lucrative offer. That's one that like I say, I started thinking about very seriously. But then just I came to a kind of a state of grace, sort of peace of mind that Awaydays, is it's never going to be like a massive international bestseller, but it is a cult classic, and that's where it needs to be. That's where it needs to stay, and that's where the story ends for that one.
I'm sure the sequel would have been great, but like you say, at the end, people have their own thoughts as to what happened to like Elvis. So maybe doing a sequel would spoil that for them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it would. It would dilute the magic. I think there's something very special about where Awaydays is and where it's ended, and just what it's, what it's sort of what its place is in culture, and what it means to readers and people who have discovered it. I think there was a risk of maybe diluting some of what's special about it by looking to not necessarily replicate it, but to augment it, to give it a second life. I just thought, nah, we'll leave it where it is.
Another great thing about the book is it came out at the end of the 90s, and football hooliganism and violence had declined by that point. So for people who were there, it's a nostalgic book, but for younger people like me, it tells a bit of British history and of a British culture, doesn't it?
It does, and for me, as a young football fan in that era, the whole spectacle. I mean, I started off like going to Anfield with my dad, and he was in the Kemden Road stand, which is, if you're looking on telly, it's the one that's opposite where the cameras are. So it's always it's the Kenny Dalglish stand now. But I would spend as much time, a bit like a tennis match, really. I would look left at the Kop, because the Kop was in its absolute pomp that, it was, it was so kind of loud and colourful and messy. But then to the right, you started seeing, the growth of this gang of much, much younger lads who were there purely to attack the away fans. And from a distance, that was really exciting because you could, you could see like 5 minutes before it happened that it was building up and building up, and then it will go off. Then I started going to away games, and I'm not a fighter myself. Like I've always said, like, if I had any worth whatsoever in a gang situation, it was making people laugh, and I was quite, I belonged, like I was popular and everything, but nobody would ever be looking to me to be the first to run in or anything. So the whole being that close to the fighting men, that to me was an occupational hazard. I was, if you wanted to be at the game, if you wanted to go to these places, then you would be up front and dangerously close to all this stuff that was going on. And I've always been reluctant to criticize it. When it's like mob against mob, I hated it when other people who didn't want anything to do with this, if they got dragged into it, I hated all that. But when it was the lads who were into it and they came across each other, it was really, really exciting. There's no two ways about that. That's why, 15, 16, 19, 25-year-old, mainly lads, although there were some girls involved with, but that's why they do it, because it's such a buzz, and it actually, in reality, it's quite rare for people to get badly hurt. It did happen. There were knives sometimes. There were some really serious incidents. People would get, could get badly hurt, but mainly, it was more kind of bravado and just the sheer kind of buzz of it. And one side or another would run quite quickly, and that would be that. And it was more the whole thing of the ritual of getting up and looking your best and seeing your mates, in the train station or the coach station, and going on those journeys. So I do think, there was something about it that I just thought was very, very different to everyday life that I wanted to document. That's why I wrote it. Never remotely imagining that the book would still be relevant decades later, and that people be. I mean, to give a measure of just how weird the whole thing is, I quite regularly get contacted by professors and PhD students, people who are writing thesis about different aspects of anything from toxic masculinity, um, you know, male pattern behavior, searching for working class identities, all these sort of things. And they get in touch and say, can we use a passage from your book? And is there anything that you'd like to add to this? Something? She's like, I'm not an intellectual. I've just, written a story about two lads who are looking for meaning in their lives. But please, take what you will from it.
So, how much are the characters based on you and the people around you at that time? I know you mentioned the music and the fashion, but like personality-wise, is it a lot based on the people you knew?
Yeah, I think so. I think most people's first book or the first story or the first venture into any kind of storytelling, I think there's often an autobiographical element there, whether they're conscious of it or not. Now, when I was writing Awaydays, I mean the whole the the world that it occupies and all those places and incidents, they're all kind of more or less real, or they're fictionalized retellings of things that are similar to things that happened. In terms of the two main characters, I had two people, in mind you know, who were friends or acquaintances or people that I knew. But it's funny, like looking back, I think with both of them, both with Carter and with Elvis, I think there are strong sort of representations of myself in there as well, even though I don't think I consciously set out to do it that way. There was there was this one particular lad who lived way out, and nobody really knew where he was from. Like he'd quite often, he was there, and then he disappeared 10 minutes before the end of the match. And so I kind of gradually worked out that he must be running for the last bus towards Chester, and that he lived somewhere on that line. I got to know him quite well, a bit of an outsider. Quite funny when you got to know him. But so that's who I had in mind, just in terms of an avatar. And then with the Elvis character, I mean, there was a few people I knew who sort of, had that kind of working class thirst for knowledge, who refused the stereotype of leaving school and going into apprenticeship. And they were massively into, I mean, there was loads of them. They were into photography, into art, into traveling, would just, get off onto Interrail and go all around Europe and come back with all these clothes and stories and everything. So there was Elvis is a composite of all of those, as a type, as a an artistic leaning, adventurous, questioning, working class lad, really. So that's where they came from, and certainly I think the thing that gives the book truth is the fact that they and the incidents and the world, was so close to the world that I occupied at the time.
Yeah. When the book was published, did you always want to turn it into a film?
Yeah, yeah. I think, I mean, I didn't write it with the intention of that happening, but I got taken on by a big agency in London, Peters, Fraser and Dunlop, and I only found this out retrospectively. But when my agent took me on, before she made the offer, she passed it to their head of film, who was a guy called Norman North. I think he's retired now, but at the time, like he was more keen that they signed me than the literary agents were. So I signed to Peters, Fraser and Dunlop, went down to meet the rest of the team, and was taken through to Norman North's office, and this, this very cool, enthusiastic man with very, very bright blue eyes. And he was just, right, let's get going. Let's get this turned into the film it deserves to be. So that was on the agenda right from the start. And I just said to him, okay, I'm completely on board with all this, but I've got to write it. I don't want it being turned into a kind of, a London version of what is a very, very regional story. So he was, any interest that came after that, he just said to them straight away, look, before we get any further, Kevin's writing this. If you're okay with that, let's talk, So that's pretty much how that came about.
You mentioned you wrote it and worked on the film, but when you were writing the book and visualizing it, did the film turn out how you imagined it all them years ago?
Um, I honestly don't think that can ever be the case. In that, when you think about the whole thing, let's start with the book. Like when you're writing the book, the writer has got this indelibly clear image and version and story that they want to put down on paper. But I think the kind of the scientific probability of whoever's reading that, imagining it in exactly the same way, is nil. Every single reader is interpreting and imagining what they're reading in their own way. They're relating it to their own experiences, their own world, and all that. So it's always going to be, it's literally thousands of different versions of the same story. And I suppose in a condensed way, that's what happens with the film version. So even though, I can sit and talk with the director and I can show, can show the cast photographs and I can talk them through. And when it comes to wardrobe and hair and everything, say, this is what they look like, here's the photos and everything. It's still going to come down to artistic interpretation. And again, I think, there's no chance of what's in your head coming out in exactly the way that you imagine it to. So the film, was very close, and in some places, a spectacular realization of what I'd hoped it would be. And I think it's really, really good. It was made on a very low budget with a very young cast, and there was, as you can tell from the way it's come together, a lot of energy and a lot of people pulling together, and a real collective group effort. So when I say it didn't turn out the way I envisaged it would do, that's not a criticism. I think that's just the reality of. I think they never do, and the best you can aspire to is a brilliant version of it. I think that's a brilliant version of it.
Yeah, it's a great film. So we spoke about the book and the film, but I just want to speak more about you. About you. When did you start writing?
Oh, well, it was. I mean, it was literally that thing of it. It was all I ever wanted to do. So my interests growing up were football and music, and I loved reading, loved writing. So I had it in the head that I wouldn't mind being the football reporter for the Liverpool Echo. And like I was telling you, I wrote the first draft of Awaydays when I think I was 18. So I've been writing all the way through. Um, when Channel 4 was formed in 1982, that seemed like a breakthrough. I love Channel 4. Like they had, the music programs were different to anything you'd see on other channels. Um, the, you know, the their early films were experimental and brave, and I just thought, so what used to happen in those analog days were you just did loads of writing off, and I mentioned before about typewriters, and like that was quite a commitment in itself, because you're talking about like heavy keys and you're bound to make mistakes, and you'd have to Tipex them out and start again and line it up. So even writing the letter to Channel 4 was like you know almost a morning's work. But I would just write off to everybody, and I got uh, I got a reply from Channel 4 just saying I'd written this play, like when I left school. I went to work in Llandudno, and that was a big, again, it was a big sort of ritual for teenagers from all over the country. Go to your nearest holiday resort, work the season, as a dishwasher or a bar staff, bingo callers, chambermaids, all this sort of stuff. And I'd written this hour-long sort of television play called Somewhere that was all based on my experiences in Llandudno. I sent it to Channel 4. I got a really nice letter back from them saying, you know, this was from what was then their youth department. And it was a guy called John Cummins. And their department basically was in charge of the chart show, the Tube, um, Revid, Soul Train, all this sort of stuff. So they wrote back and said they just didn't have a budget for drama. They'd passed it to the drama department, but in the meantime, they quite liked the voice, and the flickerings of something. So they said they'd pay for a train ticket for me to come and see them. So I more or less never came back to Liverpool from getting on that train and going to see Channel 4. Came back to pack my bags, but I went and basically tried my lot in London then. So I was doing a day at Channel 4. They basically gave me a job as a script reader there, and then just doing everything I could do to get paid as a writer. I was like driving a van for FAB Metal Components in Gunnersbury, Chiswick in the day, and then writing at night and sending off, and that really was the start of the whole thing of being paid to be a writer. It was, reviews in the music press, things like NME and Sounds, Time Out. I did an article for the Face, like the Face magazine. That was another game changer. You know, when that hit the streets in summer of 1980. So I wrote something about that world that Awaydays is set in, about the, you know, the fashion and the music and those kind of, you know, unique times. And that, you know, bit by bit was, you know, was building up a portfolio as a writer. Um, and then the madness of acid house sort of that went and kind of put everything on pause. You know, there's just, you know, I was in London at the time that all started, so you know, that was literally life changing and mind blowing what was going on there. And I knew, I mean, this is a very condensed version. There's a much longer version of this. But through going to the Liverpool matches, I got to know Peter Hooton and Mick Potter, who ran the End magazine and did loads of writing for the End, was very involved in that. And then I was home for Christmas in December 1989, and we're in this pub, the Jester, which is no longer there. That's where everybody went after the game. And Peter came over and said, you know, that the band was, you know, had got some backing, and they were going to be recording a few tracks. And I'd said to them, you know, you should get Terry Farley in, like he's, you know, because Andy Weatherall had just broken through with Primal Scream, and and Andy Weatherall and Terry Farley were big part of the Boys Own setup. Boys Own was London's equivalent of the End, really. You know, it was a bit of football, loads of music, bit of, you know, just culture, basically street culture. So it seemed as though, you know, those two worlds were destined to collide. And we got the farm in with Terry Farley in Suggs's studio. Madness had a little studio in Caledonian Road called the Liquidator. So I had Suggs overseeing events. You know, just you look back on this, like you just can't help laughing about it, because it was literally the lunatics taking over the asylum. You know, yeah, there was very little discipline and lots and lots of inspiration. And you know, you had Suggs, then you had Terry Farley, and you had, you know, the whole kind of maverick roving band of troubadours. It was the farm and all their mates and hangers on, and it was just, you know, it was a brilliant laugh. And out of that came Stepping Stone. So for me, like up until that point, everything was geared towards me, you know, doing what I'd always wanted to do, which is to be a writer. And then somebody had the absurd idea that I should be the farm's manager, which is just, again, you know, looking back, just the most hilarious and absurd proposition. But I did, you know, that's like, you know, between us all, like, you know, Suggs sort of took on all the sort of production side of things. I went off and attempted to cajole record companies to be interested. And, you know, by some incredible kind of alignment of the stars and fortune and good luck and a few good tunes, it has to be said, you know, it's all pretty much happened. And again, you look back and it seems like, it's at the time, it seemed to take forever, but it was nothing. You know, Stepping Stone come out in the April. Groovy Train was a few months later. Went out to Ibiza, and I suppose that's where my Channel 4 experience did actually come in quite useful, because you know, we made what was at the time a really groundbreaking film, you know, short film about Chilling's probably, I would say still, you know, the best, the definitive of all those documentaries about club culture in Ibiza. And I think that more than anything was the catapult that sent the farm from sort of, you know, bubbling under to being on top of the pops and being in the top 10, and then going all, it literally, it happened all over the world after that. It was just for 18 months, feet didn't touch the ground, you know, going literally everywhere you can think of. So it was only really, I mean, that probably brings us through to, I can remember being on this grueling 65-date tour of the USA. The World Cup was on, so it was 1994, and it was incredibly hot. That was the one thing I remember. Everywhere we went, the air conditioning on the bus breaking down, all of this stuff. But I was reading Trainspotting, and it was a different cover to the ones that you see now. So it must have been like one of the original, editions of Trainspotting. And I can remember being sat on the couch and thinking, when I get back, by hook or by crook, I'm just going to get that book out and start again and just see if I can get it published this time. So that's like a whistle stop tour of me from sort of teenage years to being 30 by then, and that's that's pretty much how it all came about.
So your life consisted of reading, writing, football, and music. I think this is going to be a tough question for you, but if you could only pick one, reading, music, or football, the other two go extinct, what one would you pick?
I spend an unhealthy amount of time thinking about and reading about and attending and lapping up football more than anything. It's I've got to a stage in my life now where I'm actually sitting back and thinking, what is this all about? What value does it bring? What's how can I get so invested and excited and destroyed and upset and depressed about this thing that I've got no control over whatsoever? And we would, my brother and a few of our mates were just talking the other day, saying, it's always the same. Like you get to the end of the football season, and there is a sense of relief in a way. You think, okay, I'm ready for a break from this. And it's literally a week, 10 days later, you're thinking, when are the fixtures out? Planning your life around all of this. And obviously, in the time we've been talking about, in that 25 years, we've had the advent of social media. And so as if you didn't have enough on the telly or enough to read about or think about and do, you can then spend what's left of your time just looking up all these endless accounts, so at this time of year, all the speculation about transfers and all that sort of stuff. But then, you've got your stats people producing heat maps and everything. I'm thinking, I haven't got a fucking clue what they're talking about here. but I know that he's really good and he's not so great.
It is crazy how football can make or break you following week, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, completely. It's either going to put a spring in your step and a smile on your face, or you're going to be in hiding. It is incredible, and that's across the board. I know plenty of people who have given up the whole thing of professional football. They've got amateur teams that they follow, but it's exactly the same for them. The reasons for going are they can meet their mates, have a pint. It's the social side of it. Watch some dreadful football, and if they win, they're on top of the world. If they get beat, it's a task, trying to get them to come out. So I think it must be the same all over the world, whatever type or level of football you're watching. But the hold this has over us is quite fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, if you think about it, it's 22 men kicking a bit of leather about in it for 90 minutes.
Yeah, let's not think about it like that. Let's think about it as witchcraft, and we're all under its spell.
Yeah, it's strange. So, are you optimistic for Liverpool's new season then?
I think, as a person, I sort of think it might be an ailment because I'm just like abundantly optimistic about everything all the time. It's just my nature is, I'm never really down for much at all. So it takes a lot to get me down. So I always start the season just, blindly believing that we're going to win everything, and then by about Christmas you've readjusted your expectations and you get on with this. But I do think I'm lucky because the team, all the time I've been supporting them. I mean, some of the memories and some of the the places that you've been and the moments that you've been part of, it's spectacular. It's a gift. And I do wonder because, one of my cousins was brought up an Evertonian and is every bit as passionate, probably more. So I think, I mean, they call themselves prisoners of passion. And I think I'm not saying that one team like, you know, necessarily has a better experience than other teams because it's not all about winning, is it? There's so much more that it's about. But I do wonder because that club has been put through such difficult times, especially recently with all the speculation and talk that they might even go under, they might have to go into administration. I do wonder what that does to you. I wonder whether my kind of permanently sunny personality might have been challenged a little bit by that. Who knows?
Yeah, it does look like it does upset a lot of people when the team go into administration and stuff because that's their like weekend in it and what they look
Yeah,
forward
yeah,
to.
yeah.
You speak about the music business before. You was manager of the farm. You also worked with the record label Produce, but you wrote a book called Powder about like that has a little sneak peek into what it's like in the music business. But that was a success too, wasn't it?
That was the biggest success. I always think of Awaydays, if you like, is sort of your indie single that you produce on a local label, and then it gets played on mainstream radio, and then the big record companies come and sign you. And that's pretty much how it happened with Powder. It was almost like Awaydays sort of knocked on the door and booted us open a little bit. And then Powder came in, and that was that massive sort of technical bestseller. I mean, it was weird. I mean, when it excuse me, when it first came home to me that it was probably going to be a hit, was traveling. I mean, I did still do a lot of traveling to and from London, and going into like there used to be massive. I don't know if it's still there, but WH Smith in Euston Station. And it was the first thing you saw. They had this table, and it was literally piled high with copies of Powder. And then you'd actually see people on the train with it in their hands, reading it. And it's such a weird feeling. You almost want to go over and go, I don't, that's, but that would be rude to interrupt the reader from their leisure time. So yeah, it was again, couldn't have written it with that level of insight and detail without having had some experience of it. And those years with the farm, especially the whole thing of being in the USA, because it's nothing can ever prepare you for the madness of that. Really, it's just the scale of everything from breakfast you know through to the size of your record companies, um, the team that you have working with you. Everything is enormous and exaggerated, and I think you've got to go into it with with a sense of mischief and a sense of fun. If you go into an experience like that, being deadly serious and thinking, I want to be across everything, and I want them to consult me on every single detail, and I want to have it's just too big, and it's out of control from the moment you get there anyway. You've got to see it as a helter skelter and just go on the ride and see what it takes you and enjoy it. That's what I always used to say to the band. Just don't be fixated on how big the crowd is, or how such and such a band got a bigger advance than you, or they're two places higher in the chart. It's irrelevant. What matters in life, in everything, it's what's happening now. Just enjoy now and see what happens tomorrow. And I think that, certainly by the third time we went, that sunk in, and possibly too much. I think we just had a ball.
How did you
But
get how did you get into writing crime?
I joined well. Uh, I suppose if you were to ask like what my own personal taste is, I mean, from growing up, that's always been my favorite genre in terms of TV. I can go back to watching things like Kojak. I used to love Kojak. And so I love anything to do with, with baddies and gangsters and all that. Obviously, in terms of films, I mean, Godfather, obviously 1 and 2. I actually like Godfather 3. I'm in that rare camp that like Godfather 3. Once Upon a Time in America, Goodfellas, Scarface. These are all my favorite movies. And then in the advent of sort of box set television, things like The Wire, Sopranos, Boardwalk Empire, Brotherhood, The Shield. That's I lap it up. I could sit and watch that stuff all day. And I suppose, living here and spending as much time as I have done, on trains, planes, and automobiles, going to football, you brush up against some of the people who are, who are ingrained in that world. And I think, as a writer, you're always absorbing and observing. And I just thought, really, when I finished writing Powder, actually, that that's something that I could do really well. So I wrote a book called Outlaws, which that was turned into a film called The Crew, which Stephen Graham starred in, I think. And that came out a few years ago. And then more recently, The Killing Pool and House on the Hill, which is more of a, even though it's a very different take on it, it's more of a, a detective story about a world-weary, cynical detective who's seen too much and just wants to nail these, historic, prolific international drug dealers before retirement. So it's Killing Pool. I'm about to start working on a television adaptation of that. So you never know whether these things are going to end up seeing the light of day. So many of them, like I would say 99%, never go that far. You're in development and you write the script and you get so far and then it just, for whatever reason, doesn't happen. But I'd love to see, I think that would make very, very interesting television, The Killing Pool.
Well, speaking of television, I want to talk about two big ITV series that you wrote over the last couple of years. Anne, which was about Anne Williams and the Hillsborough disaster, and the search. What was it? The Raoul Moat, the search for Raoul Moat. Was that what it's called?
Search for Raoul Moat. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I watched them both. They were both brilliant series. How did they come about?
And really, through getting to know her and the work of the Hillsborough Justice Campaign. I mean, I was at the game. I was at that semi-final. So it's always been something, and I think was straight to the heart of the two different narratives right from the start. Because as I told you, I was working in London, and came back to work on the Monday morning, and it took me a while, but I realised that quite a lot of the people I worked with thought that what had happened was as a result of the fans, storming the stadium. And I'd been there and, knew exactly what had happened and that. So just on a personal level, I'm saying, no, that's not what happened. The organization was completely up the wall, and they had to open the gates to, to alleviate some of the pressure. And that's where the disaster stemmed from. So when I moved back to Merseyside, I mean, again, with the connection with the farm, Peter and the band were very, very involved in everything from, benefit concerts to raise money for the families for their ongoing, legal pursuits and appeals. And also, consciousness raising, just trying to make the general public more widely aware of what had really happened. So on a personal level, like with my own sort of music business contacts, I was part of that group of people that put on the big concert at Anfield. which I think, did quite a bit to change perceptions. And it was through that really that, there were so many inspirational characters involved. I mean, dozens and dozens, from the families and their supporters. But Anne Williams always struck me as somebody who had a real, a universal story to tell. And for me, as a writer, that was the challenge really, was how to make something that was so personal and so particular to one community, how to make that relevant, nationwide and hopefully internationally. And the way you do that is by telling a story that's universal and relatable. And in the figure of Anne, who when we all first became aware of it, was very shy, had a mild stutter, didn't make eye contact, used to look down, was very conscious of a birthmark that she had and used to have a hair over it. And you saw that transformation really from somebody who was, in every sense, an ordinary mum, being compelled to become extraordinary, to develop superpowers. Almost, she became a detective. She became an expert on the minutiae of medical procedures. She, became an expert on the law, and she was just, such an inspirational figure. So I made the proposition to it, that I'd like to, to write something about it, and her first response was, who's going to play me? Because I remember saying to her, it will be like a Northern Erin Brockovich. And I remember saying, yeah, but you're not going to get Pretty Woman to play me, are you? And that's always the first thing. It's funny that the first thing anyone ever says is, who's going to play me? So really, sadly, Anne passed away before we were able to complete the production. Part of the reason it took so long was the ongoing inquests and legal procedures. But Anne's daughter Sarah was brilliant. She was just supported the initiative right from the start, and right through to spent loads of time with Maxine Peake, telling her about her mum and all their idiosyncrasies and habits and sayings and the music that she loved and all that. So I thought it was, it's probably, out of all the things that I've done, probably the piece that I'm most satisfied with. I just think it's a really tender, human and inspirational story. And, there's no doubt that it did the job that we set out to do, connected with people. And even if it was for, I'm not sure that it's revolutionized the way the country thinks about what happened at Hillsborough, but it certainly has challenged them. And it seemed as though for a while, that the message had sunk in. Yeah, that's the story behind that one.
Before you go to the next one, I just want to say, you mentioned you were at Hillsborough and you wrote a book on it and you did that series. Was that kind of therapy for you in a way to deal with that?
It's definitely there is something cathartic about just speaking to people generally. I think it's always best to speak. And I think that goes back to what we were talking about before, Ethan. There are a lot of particularly young males, who go through difficult times and they bottle it up, and it's the worst thing that you can do. It's always best to speak. And for a lot of the Hillsborough survivors who I interviewed for Hillsborough Voices, that was a constant theme, is that in terms that when we would put on fundraising events, and the HJC in particular was always fundraising through the badges and events that they put on and everything. And part of the rationale for that was to fund therapy, so that people could have counselling and just talk on a one-to-one basis. So Hillsborough Voices was really, from a personal point of view, it was partly an attempt to put things in order, because there were so many moving pieces and so many factors to be taken into account. And so many people get forgotten. I mean, people never talk about the everyday citizens of Sheffield who were, fantastic on the day, the way they threw the doors open to everybody. But also the Nottingham Forest fans. I mean, there's very little gets said about them, and I thought it was important, to tell the story from their point of view as well. So for anyone who hasn't read that, it's a series of first-person accounts from people who were either there on the day or who subsequently became, involved in the in the campaigns that followed. And it's everyone from medics, fans, just first responders, reporters, and right the way through to some of the politicians, who really took up the cause and had it close to the heart and ensured that it was placed in front of Parliament and that there were new inquests. So that's what Hillsborough Voices was, and of course, I interviewed Anne Williams as part of that, and so that plays a part in the journey from kind of becoming involved in the campaign to getting to know her to writing about her.
Yeah, yeah. So just on the Raoul Moat series, how did that one come about?
Came about during lockdown, and the initial spark for it was listening to an interview on Radio 4 about. So it was about domestic violence, but more specifically about the triggers for domestic violence. So, for example, they were talking about football. Sometimes when when there's a big tournament like a World Cup, or and things go badly for the national team, there's a spike in incidents of domestic violence. And during lockdown, there'd been a massive spike in domestic violence. And without betraying any confidences, so this doesn't apply to my immediate family, but in our wider family circle, we'd had knowledge, far too close knowledge of what that was all about. So I wanted to write something, and again, it's the same proposition of how do you do something meaningful that can connect with people without them feeling as though they're being lectured to, or that it's an open university thing. You always want to try and be quite subtle, almost like a Trojan horse. You use a more populist, more kind of immersive approach, and then the message comes through as a product of that. So for me, the Raoul Moat story, was fascinating, long, it was almost a couple of weeks, wasn't it, that he was on the run. But it was another misunderstood story. I felt that he'd always been interpreted, he'd been seen as something as a folk hero, somebody who gave the police a runaround. And what was less well known was why he was in prison in the first place, why he was on the run, and what his character was, that sort of coercive, controlling persona that he had. So that was really why I thought that it would be worth writing. And my regular collaborators were all similarly. They thought, yeah, this is worth doing. This is a story that needs to be told. So we set about it. It was odd because, like I say, it was the first lockdown, and then there was that brief. I think we were allowed out for about a month, weren't we? And I can remember traveling to the northeast and interviewing as many people as I could do, in what did they used to call it, socially distanced conditions.
Yeah.
Being sat outside of a cafe with a
2 meters apart.
there, and like, yeah, was it 6 feet or something? It seems like a long time ago now.
Yeah.
Anyway, that is pretty much the the way that one came about. Yeah.
Did you speak to like who was involved in it all in the actual time at the actual time?
Yeah, yeah. So everybody from, serving police officers who were, who were very much the team that ran that case. Um, yeah, a prison officer. I mean, I can, you do a sample right across the board. The local journalists who covered the story. I went up to Rothbury, which was where ultimately Raoul Moat was hiding out, and that was interesting because I went around some of the stores and was saying, just asking, especially if if the shopkeepers looked old enough to have possibly been around. And whereas you don't think about these things, there was quite a lot of them that were more than happy to talk about it, and they really brought it home. How terrifying it was actually, because we're watching through the lens of television, and we're hundreds of miles away. But for them, there's a possibility that this character was going to literally walk through the door at some point, and because he had done that, like there was a chippy that he'd gone in and at gunpoint made them empty the till, and then leaned over and took a handful of chips, didn't he? And stuff like this. But there was another swathe of the community just didn't want to talk about it. And they were saying, we would really rather you didn't do this. It was frightening at the time. But moreover, we don't want to be remembered for that. And that's the side of it that you don't really think about. You sort of trying to tell these stories because you think they're worth telling. You think they will have an impact and that can potentially change the way people think. But you've always got to keep reminding yourself that there are people who live through it, and you have to satisfy yourself that either that they're comfortable with it, or that the bigger story is worth telling in any event. So that experience of being in Rothbury was a bit of an eye opener for me, actually.
So you mentioned your book, The Killing Pool, is getting you like working on making that into a TV series. What else are you working on at the moment? Is there anything else you can talk about?
Um, I I never do, Ethan. I'm ridiculously superstitious. I always think that the moment if I talk about things too early that they don't happen. The one thing that I can tell you about that is coming out next year that I've worked on as a producer and a consultant, not as a writer, is a movie about Prince Nazim Hamed, um, who was, to my mind, the greatest British boxer of all time, and an incredible maverick and an icon. I mean, I think the UK's first Muslim superstar, certainly the first sporting superstar, and such an incredible journey, from being taken on as a 7-year-old, scrawny 7-year-old, being trained by Brendan Ingle into becoming a world champion. Um, that's going to be, I've been watching the first sort of assembly cut of that, and that's going to be brilliant. That will come out. Um, Yeah, probably where are we up? Maybe sort of Easter time. I'll have to keep an eye on that, but next year anyway.
Is that the one with Piers Brosnan that's getting filmed at the minute?
Yeah, Pierce Brosnan plays Brendan Ingle, and it's an absolutely uncanny performance because it would probably raise eyes with people thinking of the suave and sophisticated James Bond playing a gritty Sheffield Irish boxing trainer, but he's fantastic. It's the role he was born to play.
So just to finish off, what tips would you give to somebody who wants to get into writing, be it music, journalism, books, TV work?
I think, I mean, the best advice you can give is start, do it because I think, so many people have the intention and the inclination that this is something that they're interested in, that they'd like to do. Best way is always, the moment that you actually take a deep breath and go, okay, I'm going in. That's the most important. I mean, the beauty of it is, for as long as it's just, if you talk about writing, it's just you and your screen. You don't have to share it with anybody until you're ready to. You can rewrite and rewrite. And I would advocate rewriting and rewriting. I still still to this day always think that there's a slightly better version of whatever I'm writing on. And then it's, it's persistence and belief, because the one absolutely certain thing is that you're going to get loads and loads of rejections, and they hurt. It's painful. It's very easy to just go, oh, this is not meant to be, I'll do something else. But if that's your passion and that's what you do think is meant to be, then you've just got to keep going and keep going. And if you want it enough and you're good enough, it will happen. Acting, podcasting, writing, I say, give it all a crack and give it a good go.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that piece of advice. And thank you so much for joining me, Kevin. It's been great to speak to you and hear about your life.
My pleasure, Ethan. You take care, and onwards and upwards.
Thank you. Good luck with everything, and I'll see you in a bit.
Cheers.